Continuous delivery is a radical change for most software development organisations. It challenges conventional thinking in nearly every aspect of software delivery and in the wider business. How can we make a change on this scale? Hi, I'm Dave Farley of Continuous Delivery. Today I'm going to describe how technical changes can help us to make changes that ultimately are more widely spread and more important than the technical context in which they began. Continuous delivery is a simple idea. We're optimizing our delivery process to have an idea and get that idea into the hands of our users and quickly and as efficiently and reliably as we can. But in practice, it's hard. And it's hard because it reaches out and it touches on virtually every aspect of software development. We need to consider technical changes about the way in which we design, develop and release our software. We need to think about organisational changes about the way that we structure our development organisation and the organisation more broadly to allow us to work with more autonomy on more compartmentalised pieces of work. And we need to think in terms of cultural performance, the disciplines and rigour with which we undertake problem solving and decision making in these sorts of organisations. All of these things are challenging and difficult. Where do we begin to make such changes? One thing that helps is getting the metrics right. As we discussed in a previous episode, stability and throughput allow us to measure the quality of our output and the efficiency with which we can deliver that output. These are foundational concepts in determining the performance of a team. I put a link below to that previous episode if you want to catch up on that. Stability and throughput give us the ability to evaluate technical changes, organisational changes and cultural changes. And so what we'd like is that we'd like the ability to have lots of chances to measure those things so that we can get effective, high quality, frequent feedback. How do we begin to improve stability and throughput? How do we start on the journey to increasing the efficiency of our development process and increasing the quality of our output? I think the first thing to consider is to establish a consistent approach to measurement. And one of the key ideas in continuous delivery that facilitates that is the idea of the deployment pipeline. The deployment pipeline goes from commit to a releasable outcome. So it's in the perfect, ideal place to measure the efficiency of that approach. We can build in all sorts of checks along the way, but we can also keep track with the efficiency with which we're able to deliver change and the quality with which we can deliver that change based on these metrics. That's a powerful idea. Fast feedback means that we get clarity where we are. And again, in a previous episode, we've talked about the importance of fast feedback and why that gives us this ability. Let's imagine for a moment a traditional organisation undertaking some software development. Let's imagine that we've got a large legacy system in this organisation. There's an extensive approach to manual testing. Every release takes a lot of people and a lot of time and effort in order to validate that it's safe to release into production. And let's imagine that this organisation is releasing change into production on a 6-monthly release cycle. In my experience, all of those things are fairly normal, particularly in large organisations. The outcome of that approach in general, no matter what the problem domain, no matter what the diligence, is that most organisations working like that have quite a lot of bugs in production. And they're trying to cope with those. One of the pieces of feedback that we get from the State of DevOps report is that organisations practicing continuous delivery have significantly fewer bugs in production, and the reduction in time that they spend fixing bugs means that on average a team that's performing well in these practices is spending 44% more of their time on developing new features than a team that is not. Going back to our legacy organisation, if they're releasing once every 6 months, in reality, their cycle time is probably closer to 12 months, because in most organizations like that, the planning for an idea, for a feature, is a significant part of the process. We often beat ourselves up about the efficiency of our delivery, but if you look at the production of ideas for software development as a whole, such ideas will often spend months, if not years, in gestation before they even reach the point of being worked on as a piece of software. So where do we begin? Given an organisation like this, what sorts of things should we be doing in order to try and improve the stability and throughput of the systems that we can create? The first thing to do is to establish a baseline for measuring these things. So we want to try and figure out what our current numbers are for stability and throughput. And that's then going to give us an opportunity to determine if we're making improvements with our technical, cultural or organisational changes along the way. A good place to start with this is to probably do some form of value stream analysis. Start from the point of view of imagining a single line change to your production system and imagining that change being checked, validated, promoted to different parts of the development process in the normal way that you would make any other change. That's like a die trace analysis of your software development process, and it's a good way of just kind of highlight where some of the bottlenecks and some of the slower points or more expensive activities take place. You can then identify those more expensive, slower activities and try and figure out ways to speed them up, taking an experimental, evidence-based approach and try and figure out how you can do those and start work on those. Often in a large organisation, you'll be doing this on multiple fronts in parallel with other things, but use stability and throughput all of the time to try and measure the impact of the changes. Make these sorts of evolutions as a series of small steps rather than grand master plans that are going to take months to complete. A good place to start is to think about eliminating manual testing. Manual testing takes significant effort. If you think about it, manual testing is always slow, expensive, error-prone. Humans are not great at reproducibility and doing the same thing over and over again. And it's something of an abuse of human beings. It's a miserable job undertaking essentially being a robot following a script to undertake some manual testing. So we'd like to try and eliminate that with automation. And there are some strong techniques that allow us to do that. The other key place to look very often is to start looking at how you can reduce overhead in the planning stage. Planning is often, particularly in large organizations, that have grown kind of institutional scar tissue around software development, what you will find is that the planning activities take an enormous amount of effort of very experienced, very senior people in the organization, and often to little practical advantage, because often the plans that they come up with at this stage are not fulfilled. And so we can apply agile planning techniques to reduce that overhead and move from periodic, massive planning to more frequent, smaller scale, more localized planning. This is one of the organizational changes that is a very common way to improve the efficiency of the capability. The other place is to think about improving test automation across the piece. So not just replacing the manual testing, but also starting to move towards being able to drive software development from automated testing, using tests as executable specifications and continuous integration as part of that discipline. We can look then to automate configuration management and deployment. We're driven to that by the need to manage our automated testing facility and get the feedback more quickly. And then we can start thinking about what's the scope of our deployment pipeline, what constitutes a releasable unit of software. And maybe we could think about modularizing our software further or investing in the engineering to get fast feedback sufficient to drive continuous delivery. All of these practices are really facilitated by looking at trying to increase the speed of our feedback channels. So by focusing on speed, by following the advice that I have offered in previous episodes to try and get to release a position where we can get to releasable software multiple times per day, if we follow that advice, we drive out good behaviors across the board. It's almost impossible to imagine a system that's able to produce releasable software within an hour for a complex system that doesn't follow all of the disciplines of agile thinking, DevOps thinking, lean thinking, and continuous delivery principles. All of those principles are promulgated on the idea of fast, high quality feedback. This is a wonderful tool to drive the change. If you were to follow my advice and to apply an experimental approach to only speeding up and increasing the quality of the feedback that you gain from your deployment systems, so that you can get to a releasable unit of software multiple times per day, you will find that it's impossible to have teams that are too large. It's impossible to have teams that aren't working effectively and collaboratively together. It's impossible to do this on a scale where there's tight coupling between the teams. You need to manage that too. It's impossible to do this without good software architecture, without good automated testing, without good configuration management, without good deployment. All of these things are prerequisites, really, of being able to get to this really fast, high-quality feedback. And that's important because what that allows us is it allows us to use a tool to drive towards these better behaviours. You're not going to make this change in a large organisation in a single jump. The good news is that you don't need to. Each step on the journey towards continuous delivery offers an improvement. If you are not yet really using version control, and believe me, there are still some weird organizations out there that don't use version control. If you're not using version control, catch up to the 1980s, use version control, and that will be an improvement. If you're not doing continuous integration, catch up to the early 2000s, that will be an improvement. If you're not doing deployment automation, infrastructure as code, all of those things represent an improvement. You don't have to do all of them in one step, but doing stepwise change is a fundamental part of the approach of continuous improvement that is at the heart of continuous delivery. Thank you very much for watching.